What is love? Baby, don't hurt me no more.
If you love your brushes like I do and you want them to perform well, then you'll want to wash them out in a way that doesn't damage them, but restores them to their proper working conditions so you can get those super clean lines. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate my process for how I wash my brushes out in 5 easy steps. Also, my name's Jeremy, I'm a professional painter, so I've done this thousands of times. I've also messed it up a bunch and wrecked a whole gang of brushes, which you can avoid by following the steps I'm about to lay out. Alrighty, I'm gonna get into this by starting actually at step number 2. We're gonna Tarantino this a bit and go back to number 1 in a second, but we're gonna get right into it and start by bringing the brush that I'm gonna wash out to the sink where I'm gonna wash it out at. I prefer a deep slop sink or a rec sink. That's the best case scenario, but a lot of sinks will work. But first, I get the water as hot as my hands can tolerate. The hotter, the better. Just works really well to clean out the brush more efficiently. I'm gonna angle the brush with the bristles down and let the water hit the base of the bristles, and then I'm gonna start massaging those bristles with my thumbs and kind of squeezing them together. You also see me rotate the brush over and do the same thing to the other side. The runoff from the brush will be whatever color of paint was on the bristles. And what I'm looking for is the runoff to become clearer and clearer. But the longer you use the brush, the more paint the belly of the brush will have absorbed. So you want to keep kind of massaging and squeezing the base of the bristles and really working all of that paint out. You want to be super thorough and make sure you get as much of the paint out of the brush as you can. And this is a bit of a painter tip, but a lot of the hybrid paints, particularly the trim paints like emerald urethane trim enamel, can be tricky to clean out. If you don't clean them out thoroughly enough, then the leftover resins in the brush will harden to the point where the bristles are unusable, like this one here. Not great. So the way I avoid that is I will actually pre-soak any of the brushes that I've used in a hybrid paint in a mixture of water and just Dawn dish detergent. But what I do is I'll just squirt a little bit of this into a mason jar, fill up the jar just enough so that it'll soak up to like the base of the bristles. I'll leave that in there, wash out a couple other brushes, and then once it's soaked for a few minutes, I'll pull it out and then do the same exact process that I do with any of the other brushes that I've washed out with like regular acrylic paint. So again, you're just gonna work that back and forth. I will also sometimes just go ahead and squirt some Dawn dish detergent directly on the bristles and kind of massage it in and keep washing it out. You just wanna be extra thorough if you've used any kind of hybrid paint and make sure you really clear that out of the brush really well. Now you may notice that you have some dried bits of paint that are close to the ferrule of the brush, which is the metal band that holds the bristles to the handle. What happens over time as you've used the brush a lot, you'll get dried paint kind of towards this base. And it can be quite difficult to get off with like your fingernail. The best method I've found to break up those bits of dried paint and get them off the brush is actually with a wire brush, but you want to be super careful with it because you can wreck a brush. In general, wire brushes and paint brushes are not friends, and that's kind of what I was alluding to in the opening of this video. But the technique I use to do this is I'll take a wire brush and say we've got dried paint all along here. So if I orient the brush like this, you can see kind of more of the motion that I do. I'm going to take the wire brush and hit those dried bits of paint, push it decently hard, and then I'm going to lift off before I get to the tips of the bristles. If you get really aggressive with a wire brush and just smash those bristles, what happens is you actually split them even further and they'll kind of splay out, and then they'll end up looking like a really old broom and the brush will be unusable, which is not what you want. So when it comes to using a wire brush on bristles, work the base, not the tips. So now I'm gonna go back in time and talk about the first step I actually do when I wash out my paintbrushes, because the best time to wash your brush out is when it's still wet with paint, and you basically have 2 options. Number 1, you can wash out your brush as soon as you're done using it on whatever paint job you're doing, which a lot of times is not convenient. You might not be close to a sink, or you've got rolling to do, or whatever else. There's a lot of reasons. So what I prefer to do is wrap my brushes when I'm done with them in cling seal. You can also use press and seal, doesn't matter. They do the same thing. But what I do is I just take my brush, take it out of its edging container, I'll put it in a piece of cling seal and just wrap it up, and then it is good to go. If you wrap your brush up like this, it'll stay wet for days. You can save yourself and your brush a lot of pain and suffering if you keep it wet from the time you stop using it to the time that you wash it out. And again, if you let it dry, a lot of times it's gonna kill the brush and you're gonna end up again with something like this, which is no bueno. Rest in peace, Brushy McDeadface. So now that I've kept the brush wet from the time I stopped using it to when I went ahead and washed it out, and now the bristles are nice and clean, the brush is ready to move on to step number 3, which is to spin dry it. And the way I like doing that is just doing the fire starter method. I'm gonna take the handle of the brush and put it between my hands and then rub my hands back and forth just like I'm trying to start a fire in like the Boy Scouts or whatever. Just like this. And what that's gonna do is as you spin the brush, it's gonna kick off a lot of the water that you use to wash the brush out off the bristles and onto the sides of the sink. You can also use a brush spinner. I haven't used one of those since I was like 15. I never much liked them, but you do you. But what you wanna do is just, again, spin it until it's decently dry. And then you are ready to move on to step number 4, which is where we're gonna reform the bristles. Because what happens when you spin the brush, it's gonna splay the bristles out, and that's not gonna be the form that you want the brush to be in. So you want to reshape it. In general, I can just run my hands through the bristles and kind of get it back in the shape that I want it to be. You can also use a brush comb if you really want to straighten the bristles out if they're like super janky. And another thing that some folks like to do, like my brother, is he'll take a paper towel, like a blue shop towel, and just kind of squeeze the belly of the bristles and get some more of the moisture out. That's up to you. You don't have to if you feel like you've spun it enough to get the majority of the moisture out, but the bristles will still be damp at this point, which is totally fine. Now that you've reformed the brush into a pretty decent shape, you're ready to go ahead and store it in its cover. The best case scenario for storage once you have it back in its cover is to hang it up by the hole that's in the handle. That's ideal because any of the residual moisture that's in the bristles will go down towards the tips of the bristles instead of back up inside the brush, because inside the ferrule of the brush is a wooden spacer that keeps the brush formed well, and if that gets enough moisture in it, what it'll do is swell, and then it kind of splays the bristles out in a way that you don't want. And then the next time you go to use the brush, when you open up the cover, the bristles still might be damp, but the brush will be formed properly, it'll absorb paint right back up, and you'll be ready to rip. If you want some help getting started on your next paint project, then consider joining our free online community. We've got paint and primer guides, color recommendations, supply lists, and some free courses. Check out the link in the description if you're interested. Until next time, y'all take it easy, work smart, have a good one. Peace.